The first time I saw the Harbinger, it looked less like a fishing boat and more like something that had been dredged up from the bottom of the sea. Its paint was stripped in places, revealing blackened wood and rusted steel beneath. The hull leaned slightly to the starboard side, and the air around it smelled of salt, engine oil, and something else, something faintly metallic, almost like blood. I had been hired 2 weeks earlier by Captain Rourke after a short interview at the docks. He barely looked at my resume, just asked if I could follow instructions without question. When I said yes, he told me to report at dawn today. No handshake, no smile, just that flat order in a voice roughened by decades of yelling over waves. The crew was smaller than I expected. 4 men besides me, each of them looking like they had been carved from driftwood and left out in the sun too long. There was Garvey, the first mate, with a beard that hid most of his face but not the jagged scar running from his left eye to his ear. 2 younger deckhands, Dwyer and Finch, moved quietly, avoiding eye contact. And then there was Abram, the engineer, a massive man whose oil-stained overalls looked older than I was. Captain Rourke stood on the upper deck, watching us board. He wore a long black coat despite the humid morning, and his eyes tracked each of us like he was memorizing every movement. Once we were aboard, Garvey barked at me to follow him to the galley. The room was small, with low ceilings and the constant creak of shifting wood beneath our feet. A single overhead light flickered slightly, making the corners of the room seem deeper than they should have been. Garvey dropped into a seat at the table and motioned for me to sit across from him, leaned forward, resting his elbows on the wood. "Before we go out," he said, "you need to understand something. This isn't like any other fishing run. We've got rules, real rules. You follow them exactly, or you don't come back." I tried to laugh, thinking he was trying to intimidate the new guy, but his expression didn't change. His eyes stayed locked on mine. "What kind of rules?" I asked. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It was damp at the edges, and the ink looked faded, like it had been copied over many times. He slid it across the table to me. I unfolded it and read, "Rules of the Harbinger. Do not look over the starboard rail between 2:13 and 2:16 a.m. If the nets come up empty 3 times in a row, stop fishing for the night. If you hear a voice calling your name from the water, tell Garvey immediately. Do not speak to Abram after sunset. Keep the hold locked at all times, no matter what you hear from inside. If the captain rings the bell more than twice, drop everything and get below deck." I looked back up at him. "What is this? Some kind of initiation joke?" Garvey's jaw tightened. "They're not jokes. Don't treat them like jokes. You follow them, you breathe. You break them, you don't." Before I could reply, the engine roared to life, rattling the dishes in the cupboards. Garvey stood and snatched the list back from my hands. "We'll talk later. For now, get on deck." When I stepped outside, the sky was a pale wash of grey, the horizon already lost to a thin wall of mist. Finch and Dwyer were coiling ropes, their faces expressionless. Abram was leaning over a section of railing, staring down into the water with a fixed intensity. I caught myself glancing at the same spot, but the surface there was strangely darker than the rest of the sea dot. Captain Rourke shouted from the wheelhouse, and we cast off. The dock slipped away, replaced by open water that seemed to stretch on forever. Hours passed without much conversation. The crew worked in practiced silence, and I tried to match their rhythm, pulling ropes, checking nets, securing lines. By midday, the mist had thickened until I could barely see the bow from where I stood. The sea was unnervingly calm, the boat cutting through it with a low, steady hum. That wasn't until late afternoon that the first catch came in. The nets rose heavy with movement, thrashing shapes breaking the surface. But when we hauled them onto the deck, I froze. The fish were wrong. Their scales were a mottled black and grey, glistening like wet stone. Their eyes were pale and clouded, and some of them had mouths filled with rows of tiny, needle-like teeth. One flopped near my boot, and I swear it hissed before Garvey grabbed it and tossed it into a bin. "Don't look at them too long," he said without looking at me. "You'll start seeing things." By nightfall, we were anchored in still water. The sea around us was so flat it reflected the sky perfectly, making it impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. I was assigned the first watch with Dwyer. He barely spoke, just kept scanning the water with a handheld spotlight. At some point, the quiet became oppressive. The only sound was the low creak of the boat and the occasional splash far off in the mist. I found myself glancing over the starboard rail more than once, curious about why the first rule existed. It was just after 2 a.m. when Dwyer stiffened beside me. He whispered, "Don't look." I froze. The urge to turn my head was overwhelming, but his tone was sharp, almost panicked. I kept my eyes forward. For 3 full minutes, the air felt wrong, thicker, like breathing through damp cloth. I heard something moving in the water below us, slow and deliberate. It wasn't the sound of a wave or a fish breaking the surface. It was heavier, closer. When Dwyer finally exhaled, the pressure in the air lifted. He gave me a sidelong glance. "Now you know why the rule exists." I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The morning came without fanfare, the sun lifting itself reluctantly over the horizon, painting the water in streaks of pale gold. By the time I stepped onto the deck, the recruits were already lined up, their breath forming faint clouds in the crisp air. Captain Harlow stood before them, his shadow stretched long by the low light, the black brim of his cap casting his eyes into darkness. "Today," he said, his voice as steady as the tide, "you will see the first rule tested." The men shifted uneasily. Some clutched mugs of coffee, as though the warmth might protect them from whatever was coming. I knew better. Coffee did nothing against the things that prowled these waters. We began casting nets, the work rhythmic and mechanical, the ropes biting into our palms as the sun climbed higher. The water was calm, almost too calm. Even the seabirds wheeled, far overhead, as if they too knew to keep their distance. Around mid-morning, the first catch came in. Fish flopped in the nets, silver scales flashing in the light, but the air carried a sharp temps, a metallic, almost electric scent. My stomach tightened. I glanced at the recruits, scanning their faces. None of them noticed. Not yet. We began, sorting the haul. Most of it was normal cod, mackerel, the occasional squid. Then, from the bottom of one net, something slid onto the deck. It was shaped like a fish, but its skin was a sickly pale, almost translucent, veins branching across it like roots under ice. Its eyes were too large, too round, staring with an expression that seemed aware. The deck fell silent. Even the creak off the boat seemed to pause. "That," Captain Harlow said, pointing with a gloved hand, "does not belong in our waters." One of the recruits, a tall kid named Mason, bent to pick it up. Before I could stop him, the captain's voice, cut like a whip, "Don't touch it." Mason froze, his hand inches away from the thing. His eyes darted between us, confusion plain on his face. "It's just a fish, isn't it?" "No," Harlow said, "it's not." He pulled a small wooden box from under the rail. Inside was a single iron hook attached to a length of black rope. Without another word, he used the hook to spear the pale creature and lower it back into the sea. It didn't thrash or resist, it simply sank, disappearing into the depths. "Rule 1, Harlow said, looking directly at Mason. "If you catch something with eyes like that, you return it to the water immediately. No exceptions." Mason frowned. "But why?" "We could have." "Don't ask," the captain interrupted. "Questions make you slow. Slow makes you dead." The words hung in the air, heavy as the salt spray on our skin. We went back to work, but the mood had shifted. Every splash, every tug on the nets now seemed suspect. I caught Mason staring over the rail more than once, his gaze searching the water, as if expecting the pale thing to resurface. It never did. By noon, the wind had picked up, carrying with it the low groan of something deep beneath us. It was faint, almost easy to dismiss as the hull settling against the waves, but I knew that sound. I had heard it before, years ago, the first time I trained on this boat. It was the kind of sound that stayed with you long after it faded, vibrating somewhere in your bones. Captain Harlow heard it too. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, in the way his hand lingered on the rail, as though to steady himself against something unseen. He didn't say a word. Neither did I. When we docked later that evening, Mason tried again. "So, what happens if you don't throw it back?" His voice was casual, but the question hung sharp between us. I looked him in the eye and answered, "Honestly, you don't want to find out." By the 4th day at sea, the air began to feel heavier. The wind had a bite to it, carrying a tang of brine that clung to your throat. The horizon had shifted from crisp blue to a dense wall of iron grey. Clouds. The crew moved with more urgency now, double-checking knots, securing crates, glancing at the sky in ways that made me uneasy. It was Madsen who first spoke of it. "Storms brewing," he muttered, coiling a rope with hands that looked carved. from driftwood, and when a storm comes, you better remember Rule 6. I had read Rule 6 in the tattered handbook they gave me on the first day. When the storm hits, no one goes above deck. No matter what you hear, it sounded ridiculous at the time. If a storm hit, wouldn't we need to be on deck to secure the boat, help with the lines, keep everything from sliding into chaos? But no one explained. They never did. The rules existed without context, like commandments etched into stone. By evening the sea had begun to writhe. Swells lifted the boat high enough for my stomach to lurch, then dropped us into valleys of black water that hissed against the hull. The wind screamed through the rigging like some furious thing that wanted inside. The captain appeared from below, wearing his weathered coat and that same expressionless mask he always had when addressing the crew. Below deck, now, I followed the others down the narrow stairs into the cramped quarters. The air inside was thick, smelling of damp wood and engine oil. The walls groaned around us. Every roll of the boat made the lantern swing, scattering shadows across faces that looked far too calm for the violence happening outside. The storm was a living thing. We could feel it slamming against the hull, trying to tear the ship apart. Rain battered the deck in hammering waves, each impact echoing down through the metal. Then, above the roar of wind and water, I heard something else. It was faint at first, a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the deck. Then came the thud of boots, but they didn't sound like the crew's usual hurried stomps. These were slow, deliberate steps pacing directly over our heads. I looked to Madsen. Is someone still up there? He didn't look at me. No one. You need to concern yourself with. The steps stopped above the hatch that led down into our quarters. I swear I could feel whoever or whatever it was standing there, waiting. Then a voice came, low, almost drowned by the storm, but somehow it slid into the room like an icy draft. Open the hatch. I froze. The voice wasn't anyone I recognized. It wasn't even the kind of voice that sounded right coming from a human throat. It had weight to it, like it was pressing into my chest. Before I could speak, the captain's voice cut through, calm but sharp. Rule 6. No matter what. The thing above knocked. Slow, deliberate knocks that sent vibrations down the ladder. Then the dragging started again, moving away until it faded into the storm. We sat there in silence for hours, listening to the chaos outside. Eventually the wind eased, the waves softened, and the lantern's swing slowed. When the captain finally ordered us back on deck, there was no sign of damage. Everything was in its place, everything except for a set of wet footprints that led from the hatch to the edge of the deck and stopped abruptly at the railing. Madsen saw me looking at them and shook his head. Next storm, you'll understand. Even less. By the time we hit the open water, the sky had turned the color of slate. Heavy clouds churned in slow, menacing spirals, swallowing the late afternoon sun. The wind carried a wet, metallic chill that bit at the skin. I had seen storms out here before, but this one had a way of pressing down on you, like the air itself wanted to smother the deck. The recruits worked quietly, eyes flicking between their tasks and the horizon. Rule 6 was in effect. During a storm, no one is to speak above a whisper. It wasn't superstition for us. I had learned the hard way that out here, storms were more than just weather. We were pulling in the nets before the waves got too high. I kept my eyes on the crew. Everyone was tense, their movements rigid. A storm was bad enough, but when paired with the rules, it meant something worse was riding in with the wind. Halfway through securing the first net, I noticed Mason struggling with a tangled rope. The knot was a mess, soaked through and heavy. With seawater, I moved toward him to help, but before I could get there, he swore loudly. His voice cut through the low murmur of the crew like a gunshot. Every head turned to him. No one spoke, not even me. The sea seemed to react. The wind shifted abruptly, slamming against the hull with a sound like a massive hand slapping wood. The waves rolled harder, and beneath the crash of water, I thought I heard something else. A deep, distant groan, like an animal waking from sleep. Sorry, Mason muttered, forcing a nervous laugh. But no one smiled. No one moved. I grabbed his arm, hard enough that he winced. You just broke a rule, I said, my voice low. His eyes darted around, realizing the weight of what he had done. The other crew members avoided his gaze, suddenly absorbed in their work. The groan came again, closer this time. This was the part I hated. Once the storm took notice, it didn't forget you. Stay by me, I ordered him. I scanned the deck for any gaps in the rigging. Rule 7 came into play now, though I hadn't needed to invoke it in years. If something climbs aboard during a storm, do not look it in the eyes. The first wave hit hard, spraying cold salt water into our faces. Through the haze of rain and sea, I saw movement on the starboard side. Something pale clung to the edge of the railing, its shape obscured by the water, but long and wrong. Fingers that weren't fingers, a head that tilted too far, straining toward us. Mason's mouth opened like he was about to speak again, and I slapped my hand over it. "Don't," I hissed. Another crewman, Harris, moved toward the thing, muttering something I couldn't catch the moment his eyes met it. The storm roared. A wave larger than the last swallowed him whole. When the water cleared, Harris was gone. The pale shape pulled itself higher onto the rail. It didn't look at me, it looked at Mason. I shoved Mason toward the hatch leading below deck. He stumbled, still staring at the thing. Rain pounded against the wood as I pushed him inside. By the time I turned back, the rail was empty. The storm didn't break for another 4 hours. And Mason didn't say a word the entire time, not out of obedience, but because his voice was gone. The storm had not been forecasted. It came rolling in from the east, like a wall of black smoke, swallowing the horizon and silencing the distant hum of the engine. The air turned damp and electric, heavy with the smell of salt and ozone. I stood at the starboard rail, rain stinging my cheeks, watching the swells grow taller with each passing minute. "Third bell tonight," old Harrow said behind me. His voice was carried off by the wind, but I heard the weight in it. "You're going to see something." I turned to him, but his face was hidden under the shadow of his hood. His hands were locked tight on the rail, as if he were bracing against more than the waves. "What happens at the third bell?" I asked. "You'll know," he said. "Don't try to fight it. And for God's sake, keep your eyes open." By the time the first bell rang, the ship was groaning against the waves. Water rushed across the deck in sudden bursts, icy and dark, pooling near the scuppers before draining back into the sea. The crew worked in silence, each man moving with the mechanical precision of someone who had done this 100 times before. Yet their eyes never left the dark water on the port side. The second bell came 20 minutes later. The storm had grown worse. The sky was a churning mess of black clouds and flickering lightning. Rain came in sideways sheets, and the deck was slick as ice. The boat pitched and rolled violently, but the men held their footing as if they had been born on this deck. I tried to mimic their stance, my legs aching from the strain of staying upright. When the third bell sounded, the wind died for a single breath. The silence that followed was so sudden and unnatural that my pulse stumbled. Every crew member stopped what they were doing. No one moved. The sea on the port side began to change color. At first it was only a trick of the lightning, but then it deepened into something too dark to be water. It was as if the ocean itself had opened up into a void. The blackness was total, swallowing even the reflection of the storm. A ripple passed through it, slow and deliberate. Then another. I felt it before I saw it, a low vibration that moved through the hull. A shudder deep in my bones. My teeth ached from it. Shapes began to rise from the dark water. They were not fish. They were not anything I had ever seen before. Long jointed limbs like the legs of an insect, ending in hooked points, emerged first. Then came the rest. Segmented bodies, slick and glistening, with a pale underbelly that pulsed as though something was moving inside. The crew didn't flinch. Instead, they each knelt and placed one hand flat on the deck, bowing their heads toward the creatures. I stood frozen. The nearest of the things moved closer, its head door what I assumed was its head lifting toward me. It had no eyes, only a wide slit that ran across its surface, twitching open to reveal rows of small, needle-like teeth. Harrow's hand shot out and gripped my arm. "Kneel." I didn't move. My breath came in shallow bursts. The creature tilted, its head in the slit widened, revealing another row of teeth deeper inside, spiraling into darkness. "Kneel, or you won't come back," Harrow said, his voice sharp and urgent. I dropped to my knees, my palm pressed to the slick deck. The vibration in the hull grew stronger, almost unbearable. My vision wavered at the edges. One of the creatures leaned over me, its hooked limbs clicking softly against the metal railing. I felt something warm and wet drip onto the back of my neck. It wasn't rain. Then, as quickly as they had risen, the creatures sank back into the black water. The sea's surface closed over them without a ripple, and the color shifted back to its stormy gray. The wind returned all at once, howling through the rigging. The crew rose silently and went back to their stations, as if nothing had happened. I stayed on my knees, my hand shaking against the deck. Harrow bent down beside me. "Now you know," he said, "and you'll never forget." The storm had not passed. It had only grown. Waves rose in black walls, folding over the bow, and the entire vessel seemed to groan under the strain. Salt water drenched the deck, the air so thick with spray that breathing felt like drowning upright. We had been fighting the sea for hours, hauling lines, tying off ropes, bailing water by the bucket, but none of it felt like enough. My muscles were screaming, my hands raw and torn. But Captain Harlan barked orders over the roar of the wind, his voice cutting through like a blade. "Starboard net. Get it in," he shouted. The net was heavy with something. It sagged unnaturally, as if the ocean itself was holding on, unwilling to release it. Jack and I pulled, our feet slipping on the slick boards. My knuckles split open as the coarse rope ripped at my skin, but still we hauled. When the net cleared the water, I saw it was not filled with fish. Tangled inside was something pale, long and limp, human in shape, but wrong in ways that made my stomach turn. Its limbs bent slightly in the wrong places, the skin rippled, like it was stretched too thin, and the head hung to one side with a slack, lipless mouth. Jack stumbled back, swearing. "What the hell is that?" Before I could answer, Harlan was there. He didn't look surprised, not at all. He drew the flare pistol from his coat and fired point-blank into the thing. It lit in an instant, flames clinging to it despite the rain. The smell was horrific, sweet and rotting at once. "Rule 6, Harlan said calmly, as though reciting a prayer. "Anything that comes up in the nets that is not fish goes back to the deep. Burn it if you have to. Never bring it aboard alive." The wind howled harder, rattling the mast. Behind Harlan, I could see the other crew members looking on, their expressions blank, almost ritualistic, as if they had done this countless times before. No one asked questions. The thing writhed in the net as it burned, making low, almost human moans. But there was no blood, only black, tar-like liquid dripping into the sea below. It finally went still, curling into itself, and with a quick motion, Harlan cut the net free. The body fell into the churning water, disappearing instantly. The flames didn't go out when it hit the waves. For a few seconds, a burning shape sank beneath the surface, lighting the water from within before fading into darkness. We stood there, panting, our faces lit by the afterglow of the flare. I realized my hands were shaking. Jack whispered, "What was it?" Harlan's gaze fixed on the horizon. "It was the seas," he said, his voice low, "and we just gave it back." Another massive wave slammed against the hull, jolting us all. The captain turned to me. "You understand now why we have rules. Break them, and the sea will take you in ways worse than drowning." For the rest of the night, no one spoke. The rules were no longer just strange traditions. They were the only thing keeping us from joining whatever that thing had been. In the cold dark below, the sea was unnaturally calm the next morning. No wind, no waves, just a flat, dark expanse, stretching in every direction like a sheet of black glass. The silence was so complete that I could hear the faint creak of the boards beneath. My boots with each step. The crew moved about their work, in a subdued way, their eyes constantly drifting toward the horizon. No one was joking. No one was humming. The air felt thick, as if sound itself was reluctant to exist here. Captain Brannigan called me to the stern. His voice was low but sharp. "Rule 7, he said. "You've seen the others. This one you'll understand soon enough." I wanted to ask what he meant, but his expression told me not to. I followed him to the edge of the deck, where the others were gathered. They all stood in a line, staring into the still water below. At first, I didn't see anything. Then, slowly, the reflection shifted. It wasn't our faces staring back. The water was showing us something else. Faces I didn't recognize. Pale, sunken, their mouths moving silently, as if trying to speak. Their eyes locked onto mine, and a strange dizziness swept over me. It felt like the ocean was leaning upward, trying to pull me in. "Don't answer them," Brannigan muttered. His hand clamped onto my shoulder like iron. "They'll keep calling until one of us listens. That's how they choose." One of the crew, a wiry man named Harris, swayed forward, his eyes glassy, his lips parted like he was about to speak to the reflections. Without hesitation, 2 men grabbed him, dragging him backward, away from the rail. He thrashed, shouting that they were calling his name, that he had to go. Brannigan leaned close to my ear. Rule 7. Never speak to what lives under the mirror of the sea. If you do, you will trade places with it. The surface shimmered again, and in that fleeting second, Harris's reflection was gone, replaced by one of the pale faces, smiling. That smile didn't belong to anything human. That night the sea came alive again, but not with waves. It began with a sound so faint I thought it was the wind at first, a low, rhythmic hum drifting up from the black water. It pulsed like breathing, slow and deliberate. The crew froze, every head turning toward the source. The hum grew louder, weaving into a voice. It was neither male nor female, but something in between, rich and deep, resonating inside my ribs. It spoke in a language I didn't know, yet I understood every word. It was asking me to come closer. I stepped forward before I realized my feet were moving. My body felt light, as if the voice was pulling the strings. Each step brought the waters, surfaced nearer, the black glass trembling with shapes underneath. The pale faces from earlier were back, but now they were moving in unison, their mouths opening wider than seemed possible. Hands grabbed me from behind, wrenching me away. It was Brannigan. His eyes were wide and furious. Rule 8. He hissed. When the voice calls, you tie yourself to the mast, and do not move until dawn. 2 men were already doing it, thick ropes looped around their waists and the heavy timber. Brannigan shoved me toward them. Now, the voice grew sharper, angrier. The deck vibrated beneath us. Water sloshed over the rail, though the ocean remained eerily flat. I felt my will slipping again, my body aching to jump in. Brannigan yanked the knot tight around my waist. Once you answer, it takes you under, he said. And it doesn't drown you, it keeps you. The voice screamed then, a sound that rattled the teeth in my skull. In the water below, something massive rolled just beneath the surface, stirring the black into a spiral. The rope dug into my ribs as my body lunged forward against it. The only thing holding me on the deck was the mast and the old man's hands, and I realized he wasn't letting go for my sake. He was holding me because if I went in, they might all follow. Dawn was nothing more than a pale smear on the horizon. When the storm hit, there had been no warning, no change in the air, no distant rumble. One moment the sea was flat and silent, the next it was a black wall heaving beneath us. Rule 9 was shouted over the wind before I could even ask. When the storm comes without warning, you drop anchor and kill every light. The crew moved, fast, ropes slamming into the deck, anchors splashing into the churning dark. Brannigan kicked over the lanterns, sending glass and flame into the water. The ship fell into a darkness so complete, I couldn't see my own hands. The storm's roar wasn't the sound of wind. It was voices, hundreds, maybe thousands, screaming in unison. They came from every direction, some close to my ear, others far below in the deep. The hull shook with each wave, but I knew it wasn't just water hitting us. Something was striking from beneath. The deck tilted violently. A man lost his footing and slid toward the rail. Before anyone could catch him, a pale arm shot from the water and wrapped around his throat. He was gone before he could even scream. I staggered toward Brannigan, gripping the mast for balance. "We can't just sit here," I shouted. His face was grim. "If you move, it finds the weak point, and then it pulls the whole ship under." A deep crack split the air, louder than the storm. It came from below, like the sound of wood snapping under impossible weight. The deck lurched again, sending barrels and crates crashing into the sea. Brannigan's voice was raw from shouting. "Whatever happens, you do not break formation. Stay in the circle, eyes closed, mouth shut." I obeyed. I dropped to the deck, with the others, forming a tight ring, knees touching. The wood beneath us trembled like something alive. Cold spray lashed my skin, but the water smelled wrong, not of salt, but of rot and iron. The screaming outside the circle grew louder. Something heavy scraped along the deck, stopping just behind me. I felt its breath on my neck, warm and damp. I clenched my jaw, refusing to turn. The rules were the only thing keeping me alive. Then a voice I knew cut through the chaos. "My sisters," she was calling my name. She sounded terrified, begging me to help her, and I realized if I stayed still, she would die. My sister's voice cut through every sound of the storm, sharper than the wind, more urgent than the shattering waves. I could picture her face, soaked in rain, eyes wide with terror, reaching for me. My hands twitched against the slick deck. The circle stayed locked in place, bodies pressed together, every one of them rigid. Brannigan's head was bowed, his eyes squeezed shut, lips moving in a soundless chant. The voice called again, closer this time. I could hear the scrape of her bare feet on the boards, the quick patter of her steps. Something deep in my chest ached. I had not seen her in years. I had buried the guilt of leaving her behind, telling myself there had been no choice. And now, she was here, in this nightmare, alone and calling for me. I opened my eyes. The storm froze. The spray hung in the air like shards of glass. The circle of men around me was gone. The deck was empty except for her, standing 10 feet away, hair plastered to her face, clothes clinging to her small frame. Her lips trembled. "Help me." I took one step forward. The wood groaned beneath my weight, and from the shadows at the edge of the deck, something unfolded. It had too many joints. Its skin was stretched so thin I could see the black veins inside. The thing smiled with my sister's mouth. Its voice was wrong now, layered and low, words dragging out like they weighed 100 pounds each. "You broke the circle." The storm slammed back into motion. The deck tilted and split. The thing lunged. A hand clamped onto my collar, yanking me backward into the ring of men. Brannigan's eyes were wild, his face inches from mine. "Never answered the voices," he snarled. "Not even the ones you love." The thing shrieked as the circle closed again. The sound rattled my teeth. It slid back into the darkness, limbs bending the wrong way, and the storm began to ease. But I knew I had felt its breath, and I knew it knew my name. I had always thought the sea was vast enough to hide any secret. But as the truth closed in on me, I realized the ocean wasn't a hiding place, it was a trap. That night, the air was different, thick, heavy. The salt no longer smelled clean. It had a sour, metallic bite, like rust and old blood. The kind of scent that makes you breathe shallow, even if you can't explain why. The rest of the crew had gone quiet. No laughter, no shouting over the roar of the waves. Even the usual clatter of equipment seemed muted, as though the ship itself knew what was coming. I couldn't sleep. Every plank under my boots groaned louder than it should. Every shadow on deck felt like it was leaning toward me. And always, somewhere below the hum of the engines, I thought I heard it, that voice. Low, almost tender. But each syllable was dragged out too long, like it wanted to savor my unease. "Come closer." I froze in place, my hand resting on the railing. My stomach turned, not from the swaying of the boat, but because I'd heard that same voice once before. Not from the sea, from the captain. The realization hit me hard enough to make my knees lock. I turned toward the wheelhouse. The door was open, just enough for a thin sliver of yellow light to spill out across the deck. A figure was there, barely moving, shoulders swaying gently, back toward me. The light glinted off something metallic in their hand. The captain didn't turn when I stepped inside. His voice was steady, deliberate. "You've heard it too," he said, "haven't you?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied, my throat dry. He finally turned his head. His face was worn in ways the sea alone couldn't explain. Lines etched deep into his skin, eyes hollow but sharp. He looked thinner, like he'd been stretched too far over the bones of his skull. "You think the rules are strange," he continued, "but the rules are why you're still breathing. Break them, and it notices you." I didn't have to ask what it was. I'd been feeling it for weeks. In the water, in the dark corners of the ship, in the sudden stillness between waves. "The voice?" I asked. He nodded. "It doesn't come from the water. It comes from under it. And if you answer it, if you so much as think about answering it, it climbs aboard." He stepped closer. The metallic thing in his hand caught the light again. It was a knife. Old, the blade pitted with salt corrosion. I didn't back away, but my pulse was pounding so loud I barely heard him when he said, "The last rule, the one I never told you, is that when it calls your name, you kill yourself before it reaches you." The deck shifted under our feet as a swell passed beneath the boat. The captain didn't blink. I stared at him. "You're insane." He almost smiled. "No, I've just been here longer than you." Before I could say anything else, the radio in the corner crackled to life. A hiss of static, then my name, spoken in that same voice. It was as if the sound bypassed my ears and slid straight into my spine. Every muscle in my body locked up. My vision swam. My mouth went dry, but I couldn't stop my jaw from trembling. The captain gripped my shoulder so hard it hurt. "Don't answer it," he said, but I could barely hear him, because now I understood. The voice wasn't just sound, it was pulling, like a tide under the skin. And then, from somewhere deep in the hull, I heard something else. A wet, dragging scrape. A sound that didn't belong on any ship. The captain's eyes darted toward the hatch that led below deck. His voice dropped to a whisper. "It's on board." The air in the cabin felt heavier as I stood in front of the radio, listening to the static crawl in and out of meaning. My hands hovered over the dials, afraid to touch them. My mind was telling me to shut it off, but my chest felt pulled forward, like there was something in those waves I needed to hear. The voice came again, faint, as if it had traveled an impossible distance through salt water and storms. "If you hear this, you are already ours." The words were not shouted or snarled. They were spoken gently, almost kindly, but they struck deeper than any threat could. My legs weakened, and I caught myself on the edge of the desk. That voice, it wasn't entirely human. There was a cadence to it, like it had learned how to sound human but never truly belonged to the shape of one. I swallowed hard and spoke into the mic. "Who are you?" For a moment, there was no answer, just the faint ticking sound that wasn't part of the equipment. Then the voice replied, "We are the ones you feed. We are the reason this ship returns when others do not. We are the rules you follow without question." I thought about the rules. No whistling, no watching the water after dark, no speaking when the bell tolls, never ask about the shadows in the nets. They had always felt like superstitions, strange, almost comical at first, but now they slotted into place like pieces of a lock. "I didn't know I was holding you in the water," I asked. A sound came through, wet, dragging, like a body being pulled through a tight space. Then, "We are beneath. We have always been beneath. The first men who sailed these waters made the pact they took from us, and in return, they gave." The way the word "gave" was drawn out sent a shiver racing up my spine. I didn't want to know what had been given, but the silence after was worse than the telling. My voice shook as I said, "What do you want from me?" The static swelled and cracked like ice breaking. Then the voice, now closer, so close it was as though it was right behind my ear, said, "Obedience, and the continuation of the pact." I backed away from the radio. My heel struck something soft on the floor. I looked down and froze. It was a slick trail of seawater, leading from the door toward me. Drops clung to the wood, thick and viscous, not quite like normal water. It shimmered faintly in the dim cabin light. Something knocked against the hull, not like driftwood or a wave, but heavy, deliberate, rhythmic, the kind of knocking that expects to be answered. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat locked. Up. The knocks stopped. Instead, I heard footsteps, wet, slow, dragging footsteps coming from the deck above. Each one was impossibly heavy, making the boards groan. I could picture it, something climbing aboard, pulling itself over the railing with pale, waterlogged fingers. I pressed my back to the wall and gripped the flare gun by the door. My heart pounded so loud it felt like the thing could hear. The footsteps came closer, then stopped just outside the cabin door. A low, wet breath seeped through the crack in the wood. "You are the last they trained. You will be the first to train the next." Then, as if the sentence itself was a command, the door swung open. The cold had been with us for so long, I no longer remembered what warmth felt like. My hands, raw and split, clutched the rail as the sea churned in unnatural patterns below. The storm was gone, but the water still moved like something breathing just beneath the surface. It was in that silence, thick and watching, that the voice came again. Not from the radio this time, but from the sea itself. A low, deep resonance that seemed to bypass my ears and lodge directly into my bones. "You have taken the place of those who came before. The debt must be paid." I froze, every part of me wanting to deny I'd heard it, but there was no escaping the truth. This was the same presence that had whispered in the fog, that had turned the rules from superstitions into lifelines. The deck shuddered beneath my feet, and I stumbled forward. Water began to seep up between the planks as though the ship were drawing the sea inside itself. The other crew members, those few who were still alive, emerged from the shadows, their faces pale and hollow, dash-eyed. Captain Harlow was among them. His beard dripped seawater, even though he hadn't been below deck. He met my gaze, and in that moment I saw it. He'd heard the voice too. "You know what it wants," he said. I shook my head, but my stomach twisted because deep down, I did. No. The rules weren't just for safety. They were terms in a bargain made long before my time. A bargain that kept the ship afloat, that allowed her to return to port, but at a price. And that price was always the same. Someone had to stay behind in the deep. Every recruit was a gamble. Most didn't last more than a month. They'd vanish during a watch, or fall overboard in calm seas. I had been the one to train them. Without knowing, I was also preparing them to be offered up. The voice came again, more insistent now. One must go, or all will sink. The water on the deck rose to my ankles. The others didn't move. No one argued. We all knew the sea was not bluffing. Harlow stepped forward. His boots made a slow, deliberate sound against the wood. "You've lasted longer than most. That makes you the one." I backed away, heart hammering. "You can't." But the deck lurched, and something massive scraped against the hull beneath us. The ship groaned like a dying animal. We didn't have long. The others began to circle me. Not angrily, not even with malice, just grim acceptance. They weren't choosing me. The sea had already chosen, and they were simply carrying out the order. Harlow's hands gripped my shoulders with crushing strength. "If we don't give it what it wants, none of us will see land again. You understand that, don't you?" I did, and yet every instinct screamed to fight. They dragged me toward the port side. My heels scraped the slick wood, splinters biting into my palms as I grabbed at anything I could. The voice grew louder, no longer a whisper but a chorus, layered and endless, as though every soul taken before was speaking at once. "Join us, join us, join us." The water outside the railing was impossibly black. Shapes moved just below the surface, massive and slow, circling in anticipation. "Please," I said, though I wasn't sure who I was speaking to, the crew, the captain, or the thing in the deep. Harlow leaned in close, and for the first time since I'd known him, his eyes softened. "It's never easy, but it's always necessary." Then they pushed. I hit the water with a shock that stole my breath. The cold was absolute, stabbing into every inch of me. I kicked, desperate to break the surface, but something wrapped around my leg. It wasn't rope. It wasn't seaweed. It was warm, like flesh, and it pulled with terrifying strength. The last thing I saw above the waves was the ship, lit faintly by its own dying lanterns, growing smaller as I was dragged down, and then I saw them, dozens, maybe hundreds, suspended in the water around me, not swimming, not alive, just there, their eyes open, their faces pale and still. Some were recruits I'd trained, some were older, from generations past. All of them were bound in the same invisible grip that now held me. The voice spoke again, but now it was inside my head, not around me. "The ship sails because we hold it above the deep. We hold it because we are bound. Now you will hold it too." I wanted to scream, but the water filled my lungs without choking me. My body stilled. My heartbeat slowed until it matched the slow, ancient rhythm of the thing we were a part of. Above. The ship creaked once and began to move forward, its course steady, toward land. I could feel it feel her as if she were an extension of me now. I understood why the rules mattered. We were the ones enforcing them. The others around me did not speak. They simply hung there, eternal witnesses to the bargain. And I knew I would hang here too, for as long as the sea demanded, because the ship always returned. But not everyone did.